You're listening to the Vibrant Vision Podcast, a podcast designed to help you get clarity, increase your confidence, and cultivate the most important connections so you can have the impact you were created to make. I'm your host, Amanda Kerrigan. Now let's get to making that vibrant vision a reality. Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Vibrant Vision Podcast. And today we're picking up where we left off. Last episode, we're covering a two-part series on what to do when you feel overwhelmed. And there's lots of practical tips that I'll be sharing in this episode that I use with my clients and in my personal relationships when I'm talking to friends and family about overwhelmed. And I've also used these for myself a lot because overwhelm has been something that I have struggled with for a long time. And I continue to struggle with overwhelm occasionally because let's face it, we live in an overwhelming world. It's also one of the main things that I see in my coaching practice because, again, we are living in overwhelming times in an increasingly overwhelming society and an overwhelming world where everything is always coming at us. And that's the big thing that I want to talk about today is what do we do when we get overwhelmed? And last episode, I shared several ways that you can cope with overwhelm. So if you haven't listened to that, I recommend you go back and listen to that. But in that episode, I talk about how we can clear the stage of our brain to eliminate overwhelm. And that's a key concept for you. And so if you have been able to listen to that episode and you're looking for more ways to deal with overwhelm and to cope with overwhelm, I've got covered in this episode. So I have even more practical tips for you. So let's just dive right in. The first thing is do not brush off overwhelm or push through overwhelm because it will sneak up on you when you least expect it. When I was little, I had this Jack in the Box toy. And I don't know if the mechanism was weak or what, but in the middle of the night, it would all of a sudden just pop up when I was trying to sleep, and it was creepy. And I just think of overwhelm in that way. It's like your little Jack in the Box toy that is maybe demon possessed. I don't know, but it just pops up in the middle of the night when you're trying to sleep, and you keep trying to stuff it back down, but that mechanism's broken, so that lid is not going to stay closed. And we decide that we can just push our stress down, push our overwhelm away, but that's not the way it works. It's going to pop back up when we really need it not to. So for example, if you are trying to sleep, like I was when I was little, or if you really need to meet a deadline and then all of a sudden you're just swamped with overwhelm. So ask yourself, what feelings have you been denying or deferring? It's really important to just say, you know what? I am kind of feeling a little overwhelmed because that will allow you to say, I know what to do. I've listened to Amanda ramble about overwhelm and I know what to do with this. And so again, clear your stage, look at what's going on, maybe write some things down. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there's a lot of things that we can do to eliminate overwhelm so that it does not continue to pop up. And another thing to keep in mind is that stress and overwhelm don't distinguish between the different areas of your life. So, for example, I remember several years ago, I had had a major disagreement with somebody close to me in my life. And I was working on a project that had to be completed that day at work. And I just froze. I could not think. And I was like, why is this overwhelming? I know what to do. I've done this project several times because it was a monthly thing that I had to complete for my job. And it was that overwhelm that I was dealing with from that fight that I had had with that person that morning. So it doesn't distinguish between different areas of your life. And so really acknowledge where that overwhelm is coming from, and that will help you compartmentalize it so that it does not stop you from moving forward in the other areas of your life. And so that's the first way, is to know that you are feeling it and to not push it down or push it away. The next thing is to set healthy boundaries. We do a lot of talk about boundaries in our world, and that's because boundaries are so important. And often we only think of setting healthy boundaries with other people, which is good and right that we should do. We should set healthy boundaries with other people. But how many times do we set boundaries for us and then violate our own boundaries? And so, for example, I was talking to a friend the other day, and she's like, I think I'm going to tell John no to me organizing the company picnic this year because I really just don't want to do it. He asked me every year to do it. And of course, names have been changed to protect the guilty. So when John came to her about the company picnic, she was like, oh, yeah, sure, sure. And in this moment, she said, I let John violate my boundaries. And I'm like, no, no, you did not. John had no idea you had boundaries. Your boundary was, I am going to say no. And therefore, you violated your own boundary. So when we talked about it, she was completely overwhelmed. She had a lot of other things going on with her family, and she needed to go back and say no. This is harder. It's easier to say no up front. And so she had asked another person who she knew wanted to organize the company picnic if they would mind if she submitted their name. And she went to John and said, hey, I think this person would be really good at organizing the company picnic and they'd like a shot at it. Would it be okay if they did it this year? And he was totally fine with it. But the way to avoid this in the future for all of us is to create a no list. This is a list of things that we will not do. It could include things like the picnic, but it could also include things like I will say no to invitations to certain events on certain evenings so that I can protect my sleep schedule. Or I will not pursue relationships with certain types of people because they overwhelm me. And then really get into the why. Why? Why am I saying no? Because I know that I need sleep. Because I value the life that I have created for me and my family too much to allow somebody who's negative to speak into my life. And then when someone asks you to say no, you've already written it down, you've made a commitment. And then if you feel compelled to say yes, if you're like, oh, I feel guilty, ask for time. You know, I have a lot on my plate. Can I get back to you on that? I have a lot of things that I'm juggling right now. Can I take some time to see that I can do this well? People are not going to say no. And then think about it, weigh the pros and cons, and then recommit to your own boundaries. And then give a grace-filled no. Not a maybe, not, oh, I might be able to do this if you can't find somebody else that's not serving them. Give them a grace-filled no. Just, I'm sorry, I won't be able to do that this year. And you don't have to give them an answer why. If they ask you why, just repeat that. I just cannot commit to that this year. You can offer an explanation only if you want to, but your reasons are your personal business. So that's the second one. Make sure that we have good boundaries for us and then set those boundaries with other people. The third strategy is write it out. We talked about this a little bit last episode, but I really want to talk about this some more because this is my go-to strategy. If I feel stressed or overwhelmed, my first line of defense is my journal. And the reason for that is that writing activates certain parts of my brain and your brain as well. And so when we write things down, it gets our brain out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode and back into rest. And I can do this. So one thing that I like to do is just write out. I can't tell you how many journal entries I have started with, oh my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed. And by the time I've finished writing, I really assess, how do I feel in this moment now? Not quite so overwhelmed. Maybe I'm still a little bit overwhelmed, but I have a plan and I can take on what needs to be taken on. And the best way to do this is to journal before you need it. So journaling in the moment is great. Writing your things down is great. Getting that brain dump done and just doing that mind sweep of all the things that are going on in your world is really, really good. But the best way is to be proactive, as Stephen Covey says in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's why journaling is an essential part of my morning quiet time. It's where I write out my prayers because I can give those over to God and not have to worry about what's going to happen. Or I can write out, how am I feeling? I'm already starting out the day overwhelmed. I got an email that I think was junk because I don't owe anybody a debt, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. What is going on? But I'm like, okay, I have a plan now. I was going to pull my credit report and make sure nobody has any fraud on my account. But in that moment, I felt overwhelmed. And so I went to my journal this morning. I'm like, oh my gosh, is this fraud? I think it's fishing, honestly. And it lets me choose what I'm going to focus on and let me choose how I'm going to react and how I'm going to be proactive rather than letting life happen to me. And so that's the third one. Write it out, preferably before you need it, but definitely when you need it. The fourth thing is to focus on your daily top 3. Have you ever done this, that you have too many things on your to-do list? You have like 27 things that need to be done today and you don't have enough time to do it. And so when you get to the end of the day, you have only accomplished 18 things. And so those 9 things left on your to-do list are staring you in the face going, failure, loser, you didn't get me done. And so instead of feeling the day like you really accomplished something, which let's face it, 18 things you're killing it. You feel depleted and let down and stressed because you still have so much to do. So enter the top 3. This is my secret. Enter the top 3. This is my secret strategy for getting my life in order and not feeling overwhelmed. I love this tool because it helps me set clear goalposts on my day. Even if there's 87 things left on my to-do list, I end the day feeling accomplished because I accomplished my top 3. So how does this work? Write down 3 and only 3 tasks that you have to do, not 13, 3. And the reason for that is if you check off those top 3, those most important tasks, those MITs, you've won. Even if you don't get everything done on your to-do list, if you check off those top 3, you've won the day. It's super simple, but it's also super effective because at the end of the day, I don't want to say I got a lot done. I want to say I got the most important things done. I did the most important things. Our last tip for today is this: do the next right thing. When all else fails and none of these other things are working to get me out of overwhelm, I know that this is where I need to go. Just do the next right thing. Last week, I was feeling overwhelmed, and the next right thing was make my bed because it was something that I could do that kind of grounded me, and I felt accomplished. And then I can move on to the next thing. So it could be super simple and ridiculous like that. Or it could be, I need to write this report. I'm going to open a Word document or a Google Doc. Or it could be, I need to make a phone call. I'm going to look up the phone number. The next right thing is small, but it consistently moves you forward. And if you're not clear on what is the next right thing, because that happens, no judgment, happens to me, the next right thing could just be anything. Because as we start to move, the path becomes clearer. This might seem really simple, but it's something that I rely on almost daily. What's the next right thing? What's the next right thing? And I'll just keep asking myself that, especially if I have a really busy day and it feels like I have my top 3, my most important tasks, and then I've got to break those tasks down into things. I'm like, okay, what's the first thing? What's the next right thing? So that's just a really super simple way to get out of overwhelm, but it often works. So to recap, we covered 5 things in addition to last episode that could help you get out of overwhelm. Number 1, don't push it off or push it back. Number 2, set healthy boundaries. 3, write it down, get that journal out. Number 4, focus on your most important tasks, your top 3. And number 5, do the next right thing. And so I just want to say, if you feel overwhelmed, you do not have to stay there. But the other thing is, your learning is only as good as your implementation. So really be intentional right now. What are you going to use? Which of these are you going to use? Make a conscious decision to use that so that you can fight overwhelm as much as possible. And if you've enjoyed this episode, would you do me a quick favor? Would you just leave me a review in Apple Podcasts? It helps me reach more people and help them deal with things like overwhelm. So if you've enjoyed this, I'd really appreciate a review. And until next time, live your vibrant vision.